Is the ultimate act of betrayal committed by blood or by alliance? Is the truth truly buried when the document is burned, or does the flame only illuminate the ledger hidden in the dark? We're talking about family, about the people who are supposed to protect you, but who sharpen their knives on the very foundation of your trust. Before we dive into the chilling depths of this modern-day scandal, do yourself a favor. Take a second, click that subscribe button for Behind Closed Doors, and ring that notification bell. You don't want to miss a single shocking confession. Trust me, the dirt we're about to unearth isn't just deep, it's digital. The Trust Fund Terror. Chapter 1, The Humiliation and the Digital Handshake. I smiled. A tight, brittle thing that felt more like a cut on my face than an expression of amusement. I smiled when my son-in-law, Julian, struck the match. He used a custom-made 3-foot-long brass lighter, the kind only men with too much money and too little sense feel they need. He was standing by the Italian marble fireplace, the very same fireplace where my daughter, Clara, and he had exchanged vows 5 years ago. Now he was using its hearth to execute her last will and testament. He thought he was erasing her. He thought he was erasing me. The air in the library, thick with the scent of aged leather and expensive Cuban tobacco, crackled with the heat of the burning paper. The document wasn't an ordinary will. It was the physical copy of the $500 million Kingsley family trust. $500 million meant for my granddaughter, meant for Clara's legacy. He held the corners of the singeing parchment until the flames licked dangerously close to his impeccably manicured fingers. Then he dropped it. It curled into an elegant black rose of ash. Julian watched it burn, his face a study in smug triumph. "You see, Eliza," he purred, his voice slicker than the Venetian stucco on the walls, "the world has moved on. Paper, ink, that's for museum curators and old ladies clinging to the past." He was looking directly at me. He wasn't subtle. The 4 attorneys he'd assembled were silent, paid witnesses to my public execution. My face remained smooth, unreadable. But inside, a cold surgical rage began to bloom. He'd spent the last 6 months, the 6 months since Clara's funeral, systematically undermining every provision, every safeguard, every wish my daughter had set in place. He, the appointed trustee, had twisted the language, used technicalities, and leveraged his immense, ill-gotten financial power to declare the paper will invalid, citing some obscure clause about digital certification. It was all a theatrical setup for this moment, the moment of my total humiliation. "The courts agree," he continued, turning his back on the ashes, the very picture of entitlement in his Savile Row suit. "The document is void. The trusteeship, and therefore the entirety of the trust, falls to me, without restriction. You, Eliza, are excess baggage, a sentimental relic." He paused, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "I'm afraid your little house is part of the trust's assets, you know. I'll give you 30 days to vacate." A sentimental relic. He had no idea who he was talking to. He thought I was just a grieving mother. He saw an aging woman, a former government clerk, someone who filed papers. He didn't see Eliza Kingsley, senior digital forensics expert, former operative for the FBI's cyber division. He didn't see the woman who helped put away 3 separate organized crime syndicates by tracing their funds across encrypted servers and satellite relays. He saw a nuisance. A past. 30 days, I repeated, the sound barely a whisper. I stood up from the antique chair. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I didn't even argue with his lawyers. Julian looked faintly disappointed. He wanted a scene. He wanted tears. "Exactly," he said, nodding. Pleased with his control, I walked toward him, my shoes barely making a sound on the Persian rug. As I passed, I glanced down at my left hand. My fingers grazed the simple gold band I still wore on my ring finger. It wasn't my wedding ring. It was Clara's. Her modest, unadorned band. Julian had tried to have it melted down, too sentimental, he'd said, but I'd fought him for that one small piece of her. And in that moment, as my fingers brushed the slightly raised engraving on the inner surface of the band, I felt the familiar, almost imperceptible warmth of the tiny embedded microchip. The original will isn't ink on paper, Julian. It's a chain of secret keys. The trust isn't managed by a bank. It's a smart contract hidden on a private ledger. He had laughed at paper. He hadn't realized the real will was inside a piece of jewelry he dismissed as sentimental trash. I looked up at him. I maintained eye contact as I walked past him and the stunned lawyers. "Julian," I said, stopping at the library doors. I turned just enough to let him see the cold certainty in my eyes. You've just made a very serious mistake. You think you're in control of the digital world? You're not. You're just a tourist. And a tourist can be very easily lost. Then I was gone. Into the cool evening air, I got into my sedan, not a limo, not a bespoke luxury car, just a sensible, well-maintained vehicle. I didn't go home. I drove straight to a secure location, a safe house I'd maintained since my FBI days. Once inside, the polite smile vanished. The surgical rage took over. I pulled a small dedicated scanner from my briefcase, placed Clara's wedding ring gently onto the reader, and watched the screen flicker to life. A single encrypted string of text appeared. The private key. The Genesis block. You want to play digital, Julian? Fine, let's play. You just gave me 30 days. I only need 3. My first call wasn't to a lawyer. It was to an old colleague. It's Eliza, I said. I need secure lines, quantum encryption software, and the latest iteration of the Ghost protocol. I'm doing a deep dive into an institutional fraud case, and I need everything traceable. Every penny, every transaction, every single little keystroke. The game was on. The ashes of the paper will were a perfect curtain raiser for the digital hell I was about to unleash. He had been so arrogant, so blind to the true power of the very technology he claimed to understand. He was about to learn a very hard lesson. You can't burn data. He thought he had seized her legacy. He thought he had discarded me. He was wrong on both counts. I was about to teach the greedy little bastard that when you mess with a mother's legacy, you awaken a demon with a $500 million budget and the computing power of the U.S. government on her side. The digital handshake was done. Now the terror would begin. This is the moment. The click of the security door locking behind me wasn't just physical, it was a psychological shift. The grieving mother was gone. The senior digital forensics expert was activated. Julian had given me his best shot, a theatrical humiliation. Now he was about to get mine. The safe house was sparse, a high-powered server rack humming quietly, 3 4K monitors, and a military-grade encryption router. The contrast between the cold precision of this room and the gilded vulgarity of Julian's library was the perfect metaphor for our coming war. He dealt in appearances. I dealt in data. I began with Clara's ring. The microchip held the private key, the only access point to the private permissioned blockchain ledger she'd created. She was brilliant, my girl. She knew Julian was a snake. A traditional trust was too easy to corrupt, too susceptible to a greedy trustee and paper-pushing lawyers. But a smart contract? That was a fortress. Julian, with his casual contempt for anything that wasn't a quarterly earnings report, had dismissed the whole concept as nerd magic. He was about to pay for that ignorance. My fingers flew across the keyboard. My old FBI training kicked in, the focus, the ability to see patterns in a blizzard of information. I bypassed the monitoring software Julian's security team had surely installed on my home network hours ago. They were looking for Wi-Fi traffic. I was running entirely offline through a dedicated, satellite-linked channel. Deploying competence porn. This wasn't guesswork, it was a science. I ran a deep analysis on the computer drive Julian claimed to have wiped clean after Clara's death. He hadn't used military-grade deletion software. He'd used the common quick format. Amateur. A few hours with my proprietary recovery tools, and the ghost of the drive's past started emerging. Deleted files, encrypted communications, and a roadmap to the trust's financial activity. The smart contract is locked down. My contact agent Diaz messaged me on the secure line. Julian can't touch the principal, Eliza, but he's bleeding the income dry, fast. I see it, Manny, I typed back, but look at the nature of the transactions. They're not just lavish spending. That's when the hairs on my arms stood up. This wasn't just simple embezzlement. The funds weren't being used for yachts or tacky modern art. The bulk of the money was flowing through layers of shell companies, funneled into high-value, low-liquidity assets, specifically digital real estate and non-fungible tokens, NFTs. This wasn't Julian's style. He was too concrete, too old-money greedy. He's a conduit, I whispered to the empty room. He's laundering money for someone else. I cross-referenced the unique wallet addresses with Interpol and FBI watch lists I still had access to, because old agents always keep some backdoors open. The results flashed on the screen. A direct link to a known international financial crime syndicate, the kind that dealt in human trafficking and arms. My stakes just went from recovering an inheritance to taking down organized crime. This wasn't just about Julian taking my granddaughter's money anymore. This was about justice for Clara, and for the world she wanted to make better. This is a game changer. The stakes are now societal, not just personal. Suddenly the screen flashed with a red alert. A massive brute force attempt to log into the private ledger. Julian was testing the lock. He realized the paper burning had been a mistake. "He's sending his dogs," I muttered, quickly activating the countermeasures. I had anticipated this. My system was designed to repel attacks while logging the precise source IP. They were working through a server farm in Estonia. Expensive. Determined. The immediate crisis passed. The lockout held. But Julian wasn't deterred. He was escalating. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. A court order signed by a judge Julian clearly had in his pocket. It wasn't about the trust. It was about my granddaughter, Lily. The barrier hitting where it hurts. Effective immediately, all bank accounts and educational funds belonging to Lily Kingsley are frozen pending an internal audit of the trust. All distributions for her immediate care needs are suspended until further notice. He wasn't attacking my money, he was attacking my ability to care for my granddaughter. A direct, sickening blow. I called Lily's school. "Just pay the tuition out of my personal account, dear," I said, my voice calm, utterly unlike the turmoil inside me. I was prepared for this. I was always prepared. But the sheer malice of his action to target a 6-year-old made the blood run cold. He wanted to squeeze me, to force me to give up the fight by making my life with Lily untenable. Then, the true genius of his simple cruelty hit me. Julian wasn't just freezing Lily's assets. He was publicly asserting control over every aspect of her life. He was saying, "I am the guardian. I am the power." Just as I was mapping the money trail deep into the virtual real estate market, my phone rang. An unfamiliar burner number. I answered it, routing it instantly through a voice-scrambling buffer. "Eliza." It was Julian. No pleasantries. "You're wasting your time with that old FBI tech," he sneered. "I saw your little probe. Pathetic. Look, I'm feeling generous. I've prepared a contract. A consulting agreement." I leaned back in my chair, a genuine, cold smile finally appearing. This was it. The move I'd been waiting for. "I need your expertise, Eliza. Your name," he continued. "I need an expert like you to cleanse the trust's digital profile, to assure the regulatory bodies that our systems are impeccable. $5 million tax-free. Sign the NDA and you can live comfortably, quietly. Stop digging. Stop being a pest. It's an easy exit." He was offering me a way out. A bribe disguised as a job. And he was giving me the keys to the castle. "Send the contract, Julian," I said, my voice steady, professional. "I'll review it. $5 million is a decent retainer for cleaning up such a mess." He laughed, a deep, self-satisfied chuckle. "Good girl. You're smarter than I gave you credit for." Smart? He thought I was folding. He thought I was taking the money and running. He had no idea I had just accepted the contract for my own execution of him. He was opening the door and I was walking in, ready to retrieve the digital rope that would hang him. The strategic acceptance was complete. The sheep had agreed to consult for the wolf. But this sheep had teeth and an intimate knowledge of the wolf's den. $5 million. It felt like blood money, a consultation fee for my silence. Julian thought he was buying me off, putting a gilded muzzle on the old dog. He FedExed the contract, a thick stack of legalese smelling faintly of new paper and absolute hubris. He didn't just want me to stop digging. He wanted me to whitewash his sins. He wanted Eliza Kingsley, former FBI expert, to put her stamp of approval on his systems, lending legitimacy to his international laundering scheme. He thought he was smart. He wasn't. He was predictable. I spread the contract out on my desk, not to sign it, but to dissect it. I didn't need a lawyer for this. I was the one who trained the lawyers on how to write cybercrime legislation. Every clause was designed to protect Julian. The non-disclosure agreement, NDA, was ironclad, threatening ruinous penalties for revealing anything about the trust's financial structure. But Julian made a classic mistake. He let his ego do the drafting. He was so focused on the money and the NDA that he overlooked the boilerplate. There it was, buried deep in Section 4, Subclause C, the financial terrorism exemption. a standard carve-out required by major financial institutions, stating that the NDA is void if the consultant discovers activity related to funding recognized, terrorist organizations, or acts of financial terrorism. Julian, the slick, impatient tourist, must have used a template his corporate lawyers had customized for some legitimate company. He hadn't bothered to remove the clause. He didn't think he needed to. He thought he was just moving money around, not funding global chaos. He had no idea his involvement with that specific crime syndicate, the one dealing in arms and trafficking, qualified perfectly. Chekhov's gun. The legal weapon was now loaded. I signed the contract, adding my initials meticulously to every page. I then digitally certified the entire document and sent it back with an email that was pure professional ice. Contract approved. Let's start with full, unrestricted access to all current and historical wallet transactions and asset registers. I only work with systems that are fully transparent. Within the hour, I had the access codes. Julian was too confident to hesitate. He thought I was trapped by the NDA and the $5 million carrot. He had just handed the digital keys of his kingdom to the one person most qualified to burn it down. The strategic acceptance was now an official operation. My cover was flawless. I was the consultant, the fixer. I spent the first 2 days playing the part, asking Julian's tech team deliberately vague, high-level questions about security vulnerabilities and compliance issues. I was establishing my presence, showing them what they expected to see, a meticulous, by-the-book former federal agent. But under the guise of stress-testing the system, I was doing what I do best, internal espionage. I used my access to run deep packet inspection on the supposedly deleted files of Julian's personal hard drives, which his IT department had unwittingly backed up to the Trust's cloud server for my consultation. They thought they had deleted the desktop files. They didn't delete the server backups. Amateur. The hard drive was the gold mine. Not just the laundered money, that was merely financial crime. What I found was a series of encrypted text messages exchanged between Julian and a burner phone registered to an offshore account. The dates correlated perfectly with the final 2 weeks of Clara's life. Julian, is it done? I need this finalized before the quarterly review. Burner. Procedure 7. Untraceable. The paperwork is the only issue now. Julian. The trust is the only issue? The paperwork is void if she is. Make it look like the disease. Clara had been struggling with a rare, aggressive form of cancer. Julian had made it look like the cancer won, suddenly and violently, but these texts, chillingly concise, brutally clear, painted a different picture. Procedure 7. I cross-referenced the term. It was a known code name for a slow-acting, undetectable toxin. He didn't just steal her money. He killed my daughter. The $5 million was suddenly irrelevant. The trust was secondary. This was no longer about a financial settlement. It was about murder. The competence porn turned into a grim, single-minded quest for capital justice. I worked non-stop, extracting the time-stamped, geographically coded server logs from the burner phone communications. I was building a case that would hold up not just in a court of equity, but in a criminal court. On the third day, Julian called a mandatory meeting. He seemed agitated. He must have seen my deep-level access logs. He knew I was past the surface. I arrived at his high-rise office, maintaining my professional cool. The room was all glass and steel, overlooking the city, giving him the illusion of being untouchable. Eliza, he began, his voice strained, we need to amend the consulting contract. I'm concerned about the scope of your access. He slid a revised document across the mahogany table. It limited my access only to front-facing consumer data and specifically excluded all private ledger transactions. I didn't even look at the new document. I just smiled the same cold smile I had given him in the library. Julian, I said, my voice cutting through the silent room, I'm afraid that's not possible. He bristled. It's a mandatory amendment. You're breaching the terms of our agreement if you refuse to sign. I picked up the original, signed contract. Not the new one, the one he was bound by. I signed the contract, Julian. And in that contract, I paused, letting the silence draw out, the air thickening with his rising panic. There is a clause, Section 4, Subclause C, the financial terrorism exemption. It says the NDA is void if I discover, and am obliged to report, evidence of an imminent act of financial terrorism. His face drained of color. He understood. He finally understood what he'd signed. You're making a catastrophic mistake, old woman, he hissed, slamming his fist on the table. You're placing your own life, and more importantly, your granddaughter's life, in the path of very powerful people. You stop now, or I swear to God, you will regret it. That's a threat, Julian, I stated, my voice completely level. And you know I record all our conversations for liability purposes. But thank you for the warning. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a thumb-sized flash drive, and calmly plugged it into Julian's desktop tower, right there in front of him. I wasn't subtle anymore. The game of pretense was over. I've just finished compiling a full evidentiary report, I announced. It details not only the laundering for an organization designated by the U.S. government as a financial terror threat, but also a number of private text messages related to Procedure 7. The blood rushed back into his face, leaving it floored with terror. He lunged for the computer. I was faster. I hit the enter key. A tiny, almost imperceptible green light flashed on the flash drive. The compressed file containing the laundered transactions, the texts, and the GPS tagged server logs was already encrypted and sent. Not to my personal email. Julian didn't scream. He didn't rant. He just went terrifyingly still, his eyes locked on the blinking light of the flash drive. He knew what that small green flicker meant. It wasn't a document. It was a detonation. I just sent his life, his freedom, and his reputation into the hands of the U.S. government. You foolish, arrogant witch, he finally managed, the words scraping out of his throat. His expensive suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume. You think a few old FBI connections can save you? You've just exposed yourself to people who don't care about your little inheritance squabble. They deal in blood, Eliza. They will wipe you out. And Lily. The mention of my granddaughter was supposed to be the kill shot. It was supposed to make me crumble. Instead, it hardened the concrete wall I'd built around my emotions. The risk was already present, Julian, I replied, calmly pulling the flash drive back out and slipping it into my pocket. You exposed us to them when you started using my daughter's trust fund as your personal money laundering service. I'm simply mitigating the damage. And for the record, I don't deal in connections. I deal in evidence. Evidence that now proves you are not merely a thief, but a partner to terrorists and a murderer. He lunged again, this time not for the computer, but for me. Pure animal panic. I stepped back cleanly, a learned reflex from decades of dealing with cornered criminals. He stumbled, hitting the edge of the glass table. The trust is mine, he yelled, finally losing the polished veneer. I worked for this. I deserve it more than a dead girl's brat. You think I'll let a file stop me? He pulled out his phone, his hand trembling so violently he fumbled the screen unlock. I knew what he was doing. The final desperate act. He was going to move the money. You're transferring the assets, Julian? I asked, leaning against the doorframe, watching the spectacular self-destruction of a privileged man. That's your move? You're going to empty the trust and make a run for it? Yes, every penny. I'll put it all into an untraceable wallet, a ghost address. They'll never find it. I'll declare the trust hacked. Say you did it. I'll pin the whole thing on the old lady with the bad connections. He was typing furiously, his eyes wide and vacant. The ultimate irony, he was using the same technology he once mocked to execute his final fatal error. I let him do it. I watched the data transfer indicator on his phone's screen. The speed was breathtaking. Millions flowing into the digital void. The entire $500 million gone from the official accounts, officially stolen. He finished the transaction, slamming the phone down on the table, chest heaving. He looked at me, a horrible, triumphant smirk returning. It's gone, Eliza, all of it. The trust is empty. Your granddaughter has nothing. You have nothing. I win. Do you, Julian? I asked. My voice was dangerously soft. Are you sure about that? He laughed, a hysterical, brittle sound. It's in the hands of the ghosts, Eliza. Your FBI friends can't trace it. No bank, no regulatory body. It's a clean slate. I pushed myself off the doorframe. You never understood the smart contract, Julian. You always thought the original paper will was the only thing that mattered. When you burned it, you validated the digital ledger. When you tried to amend the contract, you validated my access. And now, Julian, you have just validated the final clause. He blinked. What are you talking about? There are no other clauses. I read the damn thing. You read the initial public summary? I corrected him. Clara was meticulous. She knew the greatest threat to Lily's inheritance wasn't a market crash or poor investment. It was you, your greed, your control. So she built in a failsafe, a lethal failsafe. I reached down and tapped the wedding band on my finger. the one with the hidden microchip, the one that held the key. The smart contract had a secret, non-public subroutine, a trigger clause. It stated that if the designated trustee, under duress or suspicion of fraud, attempted to transfer the entirety of the principal out of the secure network and into an untraceable external wallet, then the entire fund would be instantly and automatically routed to the secondary private wallet address on file. His eyes were darting now, connecting the dots. The white terror returned. The secondary wallet address, Julian, I finished, leaning in until my voice was a chilling whisper, is tied directly to the key embedded in Clara's wedding ring. The very ring you mocked as sentimental trash. You didn't steal the money, Julian. You triggered the ultimate transfer. You just executed the final, non-reversible command to transfer your $500 million directly back to my granddaughter's original protected wallet. You just disinherited yourself. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The money he had just stolen had gone nowhere but straight back to the person he tried to bankrupt. His own greed had been the activation switch. He had spent months manipulating, murdering, and maneuvering, only to personally ensure his victim's child received every single penny. The irony was devastating. He opened his mouth to shout, but before he could utter a single syllable of obscenity, the office door burst open. It wasn't his security team. It was Agent Manny Diaz, followed by 3 heavily armored FBI agents in full tactical gear. Julian Kingsley. Diaz's voice boomed, flat and authoritative. You are under arrest for financial terrorism, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Julian looked at me, his face contorted in a silent, impotent fury. The terror was complete. He had gambled on his superior understanding of power and wealth. He lost the bet to a mother who understood the superior power of code and justice. As the agents cuffed him, the sound of the steel on his expensive wrist was the sweetest sound I'd heard in months. He fixed his gaze on me one last time. This isn't over, Eliza. He spat, venomous and desperate. I met his gaze, utterly unmoved. Oh, Julian, it is. The trust has been secured, the evidence has been delivered, and the murderer is in custody. You're done. You chose the digital path and you found out the hard way that a retired FBI agent is the only person who knows how to truly encrypt and truly delete. I watched them lead him away, his silk tie askew, his arrogance shattered. Justice wasn't always swift, but when it arrived, delivered by the cold, precise logic of a smart contract, it was utterly absolute. The click of the handcuffs was the final punctuation mark on a chapter that had been building for months. Julian, the once untouchable power broker, was now just a terrified man in a bespoke suit being frog-marched out of his glass cage. He glanced back, one last look of pure, unadulterated hatred aimed directly at me, and I held it. I didn't flinch. He saw the cold resolve of a mother, not a consultant. I stayed behind in the sterile wreckage of his office. Agent Diaz gave me a brief approving nod before following his team out. The adrenaline that had been pumping through my veins for 72 hours began to recede, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion, but even the exhaustion felt clean, earned. The air felt lighter. I picked up the discarded documents from the mahogany table, Julian's phone still lying there, a testament to his digital folly. The entire $500 million was secured, safe in the designated wallet, automatically shielded from any further tampering. The immediate threat, the financial and the physical, was neutralized. But the story wasn't over. Justice isn't just about an arrest. It's about the catharsis of the public truth. The next 3 months were a blur of depositions, secure video conferences, and late-night evidence reviews. Julian's high-priced legal team tried every trick in the book. They argued entrapment. They argued that the smart contract was an illegal financial instrument. They argued that my retrieval of his deleted files was an unauthorized hack. They attacked my character, my grief, and my competence. They called me a rogue agent. I sat in the secure room, wearing a simple but sharp suit, and faced down every accusation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get defensive. I simply presented the data. The defense claims I illegally retrieved this data, I stated to the prosecuting attorney, my voice amplified by the room's microphone. I simply utilized the access granted to me by Mr. Kingsley under the terms of a legally binding consulting contract, which he initiated. I was looking for the security vulnerabilities he hired me to find. The fact that the vulnerability was his own criminal activity, including the explicit evidence of Procedure 7, a toxin purchased from an offshore entity, is not a reflection of my methods. It's a reflection of his guilt. The prosecutors loved it. The press, which was eating the story alive, the trust fund terror was the new headline everywhere, loved it even more. The most difficult part was the grand jury indictment for Clara's murder. Seeing the cold, hard evidence, the text messages, the toxicology report I'd pushed for, the logistics of the toxin's delivery, laid out next to my daughter's smiling photo, was like reopening the wound with surgical precision. But every piece of pain solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about the money, it was about honoring the extraordinary life Julian had casually extinguished for greed. The trial itself was a spectacle. Julian, looking pale and furious, watched as I calmly walked the jury through the competence porn of the digital evidence. The defendant called me an old woman clinging to the past. I testified, looking directly at the 12 people who held his fate. He relied on his lawyers and his belief that paper was everything. He failed to understand that in the digital age, a signature is a string of code, a promise is a smart contract, and a hidden ledger is a better witness than any human can ever be. I explained the private ledger, the untraceable transactions for the virtual assets, the layers of money laundering, and finally the irony of the failsafe. Mr. Kingsley, the supposed victim of this elaborate scheme, was so desperate to steal the $500 million that he personally triggered the final subroutine, the one that returned all funds to the rightful heir. His greed, his defining character flaw, became the ultimate mechanism of his downfall and the final act of financial justice for my daughter. When the guilty verdict came down, guilty on all counts, financial terrorism, aggravated money laundering, and first-degree murder, the courtroom erupted. Julian's face went slack, the last vestiges of his arrogance melting into pure, desolate shock. Life without parole. The catharsis was overwhelming. I didn't weep. I didn't cheer. I simply closed my notebook, gathered my documents, and walked out. Later that week, I was finally home. The old house, now legally returned to Lily's trust, felt clean again. It felt like Clara. I sat with Lily on the porch, watching the late afternoon light fall through the oak trees. The trust was secure, managed by a legitimate, court-appointed foundation. Lily's future was safe, financed by the foresight of her mother and the digital justice delivered by her grandmother. Lily, 6 years old, was drawing a picture of a woman with a big smile and a computer. "Grandma," she asked, holding up the crayon drawing, "is the bad man gone forever?" "Yes, sweetie," I said, pulling her close. "He's gone forever, and your mommy made sure we are always safe. Always." I looked at the simple gold band on my finger, the one holding the tiny chip, the memory of Clara's genius. Julian had been right about one thing. The world had moved on. It had moved into the digital. But he never understood that in the digital world, nothing is ever truly deleted. Every action leaves a log, every transaction leaves a trace, and every crime leaves a digital ghost, waiting for a forensics expert to find it. My journey, the confession you've been listening to, is almost complete. The physical fight is over, the financial recovery is done, and the criminal is locked away. But the true resolution isn't just about justice served. It's about the message. It's about knowing that even when faced with overwhelming power and corrosive greed, the most powerful weapon is not money or muscle, but the uncompromising, clear-eyed truth embedded in a ledger. I looked back at the camera, thinking of all the others out there, holding a secret, facing down a powerful, corrupt family member. If you're holding a digital secret, remember this. The technology they use to betray you can be the very same tool you use to save yourself. The future is digital, but the law is not blind. And neither am I. The silence after the trial was deafening. It was a clean silence, scrubbed of Julian's poisonous influence and the gnawing anxiety of the fight. The reunion with Lily, my granddaughter, in the house that was finally and securely hers, wasn't a dramatic, tearful affair. It was quiet. It was real. It was catharsis worn threadbare, the kind of deep peace that settles in after a long, brutal storm. Lily was drawing, always drawing. Now, her sketches were no longer shadowed with the confusion of her father's sudden, cold distance. They were bright. The woman with the computer, her grandmother, was always smiling. The villains, which she understood only as bad men who took things, were scribbled over in heavy black crayon, permanently canceled out. We didn't talk about Julian much. What was there to say? The man who had worn the mask of family, who had used grief as a weapon and technology as a shield, was now just a number in a federal prison system. I had given my testimony. I had presented the facts, the code, the chilling evidence of Procedure 7 that had taken my daughter's life. The court had delivered the verdict. The justice system, that flawed, beautiful machine, had finally worked. But true closure isn't found in a court transcript. It's found in the quiet moments, in the rebuilding. I watched Lily play in the garden, a garden Clara had loved, and I felt the heavy physical weight of my responsibility lift. The $500 million was safe, managed by a foundation that reported directly to a court-appointed overseer, ensuring every penny went toward Lily's future, exactly as Clara had intended. The money was simply a tool now, a framework for a secure life, no longer a corrupting force. I finally allowed myself to open the last of Clara's digital files, not the evidence I had recovered from Julian's purge, but her personal encrypted journal, a final, intimate letter I hadn't touched until now. I sat in my old FBI safe house, the computer screens dark, the server silent, and read my daughter's final thoughts. Mom, if you're reading this, he won? Or he thinks he has? I didn't beat the cancer, but I beat his greed. I know him, Mom. I know what he's capable of. He sees the money, not me. But I've left you the key. Not the money, the key. The one to the ledger. You taught me that code doesn't lie. You taught me how to trace the untraceable. You're the only one who can undo the digital knots I tied. Trust the contract, trust the ring, and tell Lily I never stopped fighting. Tears finally came then, hot and stinging. Not tears of grief. Grief had been my constant companion. These were tears of connection, of shared purpose. Clara hadn't just relied on my love. She had relied on my competence. She had relied on the specialized skills I thought I had left behind in the dusty archives of the Bureau. She saw the digital forensics expert in me, not just the mother. She had engineered her own defense, knowing that only I had the unique skill set to execute the ultimate irony of the failsafe. The whole journey was a grim masterpiece of planning. Julian's humiliation in the library, his burning of the paper will, was the moment I realized Clara's genius. He thought he was destroying evidence. He was merely initiating the first step of her meticulously coded revenge. He underestimated the power of silence. My silence in that library, my strategic acceptance of his bribe, my refusal to engage in the petty legal fight he expected. He underestimated the power of the past. I put the journal away. The task was complete. The resolution was total. I had brought a financial terrorist and a murderer to justice, recovered a $500 million legacy, and secured my granddaughter's future. I walked out of the safe house, locking the door behind me for the very last time. The space where I waged a silent war was now irrelevant. My battlefield was now the quiet, sun-drenched garden where Lily played. I called Agent Diaz one last time. It's over, Manny. I'm decommissioning the safe house. All systems down, all access revoked. The ghost is retiring. You did good, Eliza, Diaz said, his voice unusually warm. You did what we couldn't have done on the inside. You got the evidence, not the noise. I just used the tools he provided, I corrected him. Julian was right about one thing, Manny. The world has moved on. It's digital. But he didn't realize that a simple gold band can hold more power than any vault. The future is coded, and only the people who truly understand the code can control the narrative. I hung up, got into my sensible car, and drove home. I was no longer an operative. I was no longer a consultant. I was just a grandmother, driving toward the only truth that mattered. A little girl who was safe. As the sun set, casting long, peaceful shadows over the house, I held Lily tight. I thought of Julian alone in his cell, realizing that the technology he once ridiculed had been the perfect silent executioner of his ambition. He had gambled on the system being opaque. He had gambled on my grief making me weak. He gambled on the chaos of the digital. He lost to the one immutable law I had learned in 30 years with the Bureau. Data always tells the truth. Julian believed he had control. He was wrong. Clara and I had control. We had the last word. And the last word, the ultimate resolution, was simply peace. The financial terror was over. The trust was restored. The terror had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet final click of a secure digital lock. If you've listened to this and you're nodding along, maybe you're facing your own battle, financial or otherwise. Remember that the simplest truth is often the most heavily encrypted. Don't let them erase your past. Don't let them burn your evidence. In the end, the most powerful tool you have is not vengeance, but clarity.